In a world where right versus left, concrete versus tundra, zealot versus dogmatic, one man steps into the gauntlet of rhetoric with the flags of justice, truth, and honor, with a new vision of the last frontier, and with the courage to tell all Alaskans, I'm back. This is The Tom Anderson Show with Optima Public Relations owner Tom Anderson on Fox News Talk, KOAN. Fair and balanced for Alaska.
And this is Tom Anderson. Welcome, folks. It's a sunny 44 degrees out, Thursday, March 17th. It's 5:07 p.m. I hope you're driving safe. Traffic in from the valley was moderate. Traffic from Anchorage out to the valley was heavy, which seems to be the case at rush hour. Sure appreciate you tuning in. If you're online, welcome. And for those of you driving around, scurrying around, be careful calling, but if you want to, you can, 522-1020. Today we have another intriguing guest. I've had a good record of intriguing guests this week. We've bounced from celebrity letter writing to Muslim academic physicians to Barbara. Barbara, is it Heidenreich? Heidenreich? How do you pronounce your name?
You got it right the first time, Heidenreich.
I love it. That's a good German. Is that your husband's name or yours?
No, that's my family name. So,
I love it. You got some Deutsch in you. Well, good for you. Barbara is, what would you call yourself, an animal training expert?
Yeah, I tend to just call myself an animal trainer. I know it kind of sounds a little generic, but as you know, I don't train the ordinary dog and cat kind of thing. I have some interesting creatures in my repertoire.
Absolutely, and that's what Barbara and I reached out to each other. I was looking for guests at a national level, and she was recommended and has a very stellar background in animal training, and not just your dog and cat, as much as very unique animals, as she noted. And I'm looking at a picture of her, and she's going to give her information throughout the show, so you can contact her if you have a question or follow her on Twitter and Facebook and others through Good Bird Inc. But, I noticed that the parrot, Barbara, and Good Bird Inc., is that what got you started in this? What inspired you initially? Were you a young girl, or was this through academic training, in college?
Well, kind of all those things, to be honest. When I was a child, I, like many people, was very interested in animals and spent a lot of time outdoors. And I used to do things like catch crayfish and frogs and put them in baby carriages. Not so good for the
that's
animals.
Cute. I love frogs and turtles, so that's cute.
Yeah, not always the best thing for the critters, but it was really because I thought they were amazing. And, of course, I pretty much always knew I wanted to work with animals and started volunteering at a veterinary hospital in high school and decided that wasn't quite the right fit for me, and so later on went to study zoology in college, just trying to find out about different jobs you can have with animals, and stumbled upon animal training when I graduated from college and started working at a zoo, and just loved it. I started doing free flight bird shows where we basically teach people about wildlife and conservation and things like that, and we do things like, fly bald eagles over people's heads so that they go, wow, those animals are amazing.
Wow.
And, yeah, I know you guys get to see them a lot up there, but some of us down south don't always get to see them as frequently, so they're pretty amazing when people get a chance to see those animals up close and personal, and just really stuck with it. I mean, definitely birds are my specialty, but I also work with other animals too, and the whole Good Bird Inc. thing started because a lot of people would ask me questions about their companion parrots after doing a bird show, and I found out that a lot of people were facing the same challenges, so I decided to start producing material to help them out, and that just has kind of snowballed. So I do work with the companion parrot community a lot, but I also still work extensively with zoos and also with wildlife facilities and things of that nature.
Well, let's target first through the interview parrots. And I hear parrots squawking in the background. How many do you have in your home?
I have 5 parrots in my background, and I decided in order to have the best phone line, I would be in the room where 2 of the parrots are, and one of them happens to be the one that talks the most. So he's joining in a little bit in the background.
That is
Just
so
said,
cute.
Hi, Gilbert.
I can hear him. Well, let's talk about purchasing parrots, and for those listening who might be eyeing the purchase of a parrot or entertaining it for their child, for themselves, what profile would you say best fits a parrot purchaser and owner. And what I mean by that is think of like a dog. I know that, we have a lab, so labs are gentle with kids. I have a 6-year-old, so that fits. But I don't know if, a dachshund. Maybe I'm speaking at a school. I don't know. Let's just say a dachshund doesn't fit well with a kid, or a schnauzer. Well, how does it work with parrots when you advise people that say, hey, I'm thinking about purchasing one? And the other side of that coin is, what is the expense? What's the parameter for parrots, for cost?
Well, parrots are definitely a bit different than having a dog or a cat as a companion animal. And one of the things about parrots is they're not really domesticated animals, so genetically they're still the same as their wild counterparts. So you have a few different types of issues that you're addressing. They don't necessarily seek out human interaction like some of our other pets that we commonly have in our home have, but they can. And usually the way they kind of have that relationship is to work with a bird that has been raised for the companion parrot industry, as opposed to a bird that was wild caught, or an animal that was on display or in a breeding situation. Those birds tend to have fear responses towards people, so they don't make the greatest companions. But when those birds are comfortable with people, they can attach really strongly, which in some ways can be great, because then you get to have that wonderful relationship with this really unusual creature. But sometimes it can also be really demanding, where they get to where they never want to be separated from you, and maybe they start screaming to get your attention, to get you to come back into the room. So they present a few different challenges than some of our other companion animals. But I usually recommend, if somebody's interested, and especially if it's their first bird, that they might think about trying with something try getting started with something a little bit smaller, like what people tend to call them parakeets, but they're actually called budgerigars or budgies. And start maybe with one of those guys, or maybe a cockatiel, or maybe a small conure species like a green cheek conure.
Now I'm going to enter. Now, what about Beretta? Remember Beretta, the movie, the series? What was his bird? Was that a cockatoo?
That was a cockatoo, which we consider that particular species a cockatoo. I think he had a sulfur-crested cockatoo, which is a bigger species of parrot. And a lot of times we don't tend to have people start out with a bigger species, just because they're a little bit louder, and if there is aggressive behavior, they can bite a little bit harder. So all those things create a different set of challenges that might be a little much to start with. They also live a lot longer. Cockatiels can live a long time. Some of them can get up to almost 30 years old. But usually you think about 15 to 20 years.
So more. 15 to 20 for those. And it seems like there's such a derivation, such a difference in species and ages that, someone really has to do research. We actually have I'm looking at my screen here, we have a call in from Mark. Welcome to the program, Mark. And what's your question or comment for Barbara?
Hey, Barbara. My name is Mark. We have two separate pairs of conures, a boy and a girl cinnamon fancy green cheek, that are bonded to each other and to us. We understand that this is not very common. They are not having sex, and we're okay with that.
I would be okay with that, too.
Yeah, like we have a choice. The other girl is a yellow-sided fancy green cheek that is bonded to us and to a male green cheek. They're now having sex, and the male is very aggressive toward everybody. Hates the female to spend time with us. Is this going to pass?
Okay, great question. Well, I think
thanks for the call, Mark. That's a good question.
It's wonderful that you have been able to maintain the relationship with your green cheek conures, so that they're interactive with each other, because then they can have that wonderful social interaction between the two of them, and yet at the same time maintain a great relationship with your family. And I have that same situation with my pair of cockatiels here, who do they do the wild thing for sure, and every once in a while they lay eggs, although I don't let the eggs hatch, but they still will eagerly come down and interact with me. In fact, if I'm in the room, they fly right down to my head and wonder what's going on and wonder if I have any goodies for them. So that's a great situation you've got going on there, and once again, evidence that it's totally possible. The other ones, it sounds like they're a little bit different. One thing to keep in mind about parrots is they're not always sexually active or reproductive. So what happens is there's environmental triggers that increase the likelihood that they're going to want to reproduce, and that includes long light cycles and really rich diets and obviously access to a mate, which he does have. And if there's a nest box type thing in the cage, that too can help trigger that sort of sexual behavior going on there. So one thing, although you can try and work with them during this time, one thing that you might take advantage of is when the season settles down and the light cycles are shorter. So, when you're coming up on winter and he starts to be less interested in mating with her, you may start trying to pick up a training program going on with him. So start getting him taking millet spray or little pieces of sunflower seed out of your hand so he starts associating you with good things. Start teaching him some simple behaviors like targeting so that you can have a way to communicate to him where you want him to go. Maybe train him some simple things like turnarounds and waves. And now you're going to build a relationship. And now when you go into breeding season next year, you'll have some tools to work with and he'll be a little bit more responsive.
Man, Barbara, this is good free advice. I hope people that tuning in or listening that are interested in parrots and others. I want to come back in the next segment, talk more about parrots and some of the other unique animals that we might think people wouldn't own domestically but do. We've got Barbara Heidenreich on with us from Austin, Texas, a beautiful city, and she will be back with us and with your questions. 907-522-1020. This is the Tom Anderson Show.
Let me tell you about the birds and the bees and the flowers and the trees. I look up to the little bird that glides across the sky.
Good song, appropriate for my guest and the subject matter. This is Tom Anderson. We have Barbara Heidenreich on from Austin, Texas. She is the head of Good Bird, Inc. And Barbara, phone calls are starting to come in as you prepared me for. I'm sure people with added girls to you for your advocacy and expertise and hopefully some questions relating to animals. Before we get to them, we've got Patricia, then Vanessa in the queue. Really quickly, what are some other animals, and sorry if Patricia and Vanessa have bird questions, but I just really quick want to ask, what are some other fun ones that a driver or a listener might say, what? I didn't know that was a pet that you have that you have handled.
Well, actually, I'm going to give you a really interesting one because just this last weekend, I got to train a capybara.
And what is that?
A capybara is the largest species of rodent.
Oh, I was telling our producer, Chris Coleman, I said, I think she handles those big rats. And he said, what? And we weren't sure what the name was. And I said, well, she'll say the name. Okay, that's what it's called. I didn't know that.
Yeah, they're about 100 pounds to give you an idea of just how big they are. And but they don't have a tail like a rat or anything like that, but they do have the teeth just like a rodent, sort of those big teeth up front. And this particular capybara is owned by a woman not too far from me here, and she's a big advocate for rodents and likes to educate people about rodents and has a special interest in capybaras. She's set up her entire house so that it's capybara friendly because they really like to swim and they like to eliminate in water. So the capybara even has his own little pool of water in the bathroom so he can take care of business. And he has his own pool in the backyard.
That would be a great practical joke to get a bunch of those. And if you had a pool and invite some buddies over and say, hey, come on back. I got a bunch of big rats in the pool in the back. And they're like, ha ha, you'd have a heart attack. That's fun. Well, that's a unique example that you do have a breadth of a spectrum of animals, and I want to get more into those, but we won't make the callers wait too long here. Patricia, you're next up. Welcome to the Tom Anderson Show, and what's your question or comment for Barbara?
Hi, Barbara. I am early in a relationship with an African gray. We think she's about 6 or 7 years old, probably female. Steps up, very easy to handle, and plays with toys like I've never seen a gray play. But, here's my but, she gnaws on my hand. She's not fighting. I suspect it's sexually related, but I'm wondering what sexual purpose this could have, or maybe she's just gnawing on me like a toy. What do you think?
I think the second thing that you said is absolutely right, is that a lot of times our parrots use their beak in a way that's similar to playing. And so even though they may be gnawing on your fingers and having a good time with it, sometimes the pressure gets a little too hard for us. And believe it or not, that's really easy to fix. And I'll tell you how to do it right now. All you have to do is, if you're playing with your bird and she's putting a little too much pressure on your fingertips, all you have to do is just gently have her step off your hand, and basically she loses the opportunity to interact with your fingers for just a few seconds. And then as soon as you've waited those few seconds, let her step back up on you, and if she continues to play gently, then play continues. But if she gets a little too hard, then she goes back on the perch or back down next to you, wherever she is. And that will teach her that whenever she chomps down just a little too hard, she loses the opportunity to interact with you. You don't have to be the bad guy. You don't have to tell her no or stop or gentle. You just say, oh, we don't get to play anymore when you play that rough. Another thing you can do to help prevent her from gnawing a little too hard is to have some nice little foot toys with you. So things like sometimes little blocks and little pieces of wood are nice things that your parrot can chew on instead of your fingers, and that way she won't even necessarily engage with chomping on your fingers. So that's a great way to address that problem.
You make it sound easy.
Really do, Barbara? Okay. You really do make it sound easy. I'm impressed. Thank you for the call, Patricia. Barbara, it sounds like these parrots have a lot of sexual problems. I'm going to call you Dr. Ruth here in a second. Is it the last two callers had a sexual or maybe procreative respected question? Is that an issue in terms of their gender, male to male, male to female? Is there tension there with these birds?
Well, one thing that's a little different about parrots compared to some of our usual companion animals is that they do form these really strong pair bonds with a mate out in the wild, and they can transfer that relationship to somebody in the home, so they can have that really tight bond with a human. And what can sometimes happen is those birds will start exhibiting aggressive behavior to everybody else because they want you to stay away from their mate, and then sometimes they'll even exhibit it to their mate if somebody else comes too close to them, and that's just a little redirected aggression that they're not happy with this person coming too close.
Wow. They sound like smart birds. Well, we have another caller here, Vanessa, calling in. Thanks for waiting, Vanessa. Welcome to the program. And what's your question or comment for Barbara?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Barbara for all the wonderful work she's done in this field. I really appreciate you. And my question is this. I'm soon to adopt, I have other birds, but I'm soon to adopt a double yellow-headed Amazon. And I've had trouble finding advice on what to do about the bluffing stage. I know Amazons, like most parrots, are prone to that, but I really haven't found any really helpful advice. What professional advice can you give me? When does it start, and how do I handle it? And is there a good way to curb it before it even begins?
I missed one word that you said that I think is critical. What did you call the stage that you're concerned about?
Bluffing.
Bluffing. Okay. All right. So here's a good thing to know about parrots. Whenever they're showing any body language that indicates they're thinking about aggressive behavior or they're not comfortable, I consider it as wonderful information. So instead of saying he's bluffing, I'll say, he just told me he didn't like something. And he didn't have to actually bite me to tell me. He just used subtler body language. And I really want my parrot to do that because I don't want my parrot to ever learn that he has to use biting as a way to get something he doesn't like happening to stop. So I look at it as a really important tool. So what we want to do is whenever a parrot does the tiniest little indication that he's not comfortable with something, we go, I got the message. Whatever's going on here you're not happy with, let me change my strategy so that you'll be more comfortable with this situation. So if you ever see him doing anything, just go, okay, that's communication to me that I'm doing something that doesn't make him happy. Let's find a different way to get to whatever it is we want, whether it's stepping up or going back in the cage or whatever you're asking him to do.
Thank you for the call, Vanessa. We have a few more callers coming in. They're probably gonna have to wait here through the break unless we have we have 2 more minutes. So Michelle, welcome to the program. And what's your question or comment for Barbara?
Hi, Barbara. I wanted to find out the best way to introduce conures. I have a 3-year-old conure that we've had for about a year, and we have a 5-month-old conure that we just got. And my conure that I had is not accepting of the new conure.
Okay. And are either one or both flighted?
No, their wings are clipped.
Okay. Well, what you'll want to do is make sure you can set them up in a situation, not in your first introductions definitely are not in a cage together or anything like that. And they may never live in a cage together, but I would set it up so that they can view each other, safely, and maybe, eat from their food bowls kind of side by side but in separate enclosures. And then over time, once that younger one is really confident and knows his environment, try introducing them in another part of the house, whatever, away from their enclosures. Make sure both birds are both comfortable in that area. They've both had experience in that area. And then start reinforcing both birds for sitting comfortably and calmly in the same room, and then you can gradually let them be a little bit closer to one another and reinforce them for being calm while the other bird's around. Sometimes you can give the one that tends to be more assertive a bath so that they're a little more relaxed beforehand, so they're less likely to go after the other bird, and always make sure the bird that isn't so confident has the ability to move away if he's uncomfortable.
Awesome response. Barbara Heidenreich will be back with the Tom Anderson Show. She's with Good Bird Inc. She's an expert. We've really focused on parrots, but there are other animals. If you have questions on any, you let us know, and stick with us through the break. We'll be right back. The Tom Anderson Show.
Into the misty morning sun. Blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these broken wings and learn to fly all your life.
What a good song. We're back. This is Tom Anderson and the Tom Anderson Show. What's the temperature out right now? It's sunny here, Barbara, in Alaska. Probably not like you in Texas, but it's 61 degrees. What's the temperature there?
Oh, I think today it was definitely in the 70s, if not 80.
Yeah, it's spring and getting summer for sure. And we have Barbara Heidenreich on. She's not only a parrot expert, but an expert in a multitude of different animals and training perspectives. But today our callers seem to be focused on parrots and ownership and all the dynamics therein. And that's pretty neat. And it's nice to know that folks like you are out there, Barbara. We're going to go, before we go to Debbie, we're going to go to her next. But I wanted to say, maybe you could give information to the people listening online and, on radio here in Alaska on how they can get more information. Do they go to a website? Do you have a website or a phone number, or, do you charge for consultation?
Well, I do have a website. It's goodbirdinc.com, like goodbirdincorporated.com. And, of course, I have YouTube videos and a blog with lots of free resources, so they're welcome to check that out as well. And I've produced 7 DVD now. One of them is on rabbit training, the rest are on parrot training. I also have a couple books, one on aggressive behavior and one on solving parrot behavior problems, and I publish a digital magazine. So
wow. So, and then also a Facebook page. They can go to Good Bird Inc., Barbara Heidenreich, and you can like her page, and that's a no-brainer. I've done that as well. So, well, great. Well, we have more calls. We have Debbie from Oklahoma City. Welcome to the program, Debbie. What's your question or comment for Barbara?
Well, first of all, thank you. About 3 years ago, I adopted, abandoned, and abused a cluster parrot. And any time I am under stress, the bird starts crying, and he has abandonment issues. He does feathers destruction. And I was just wondering any suggestions on what you could give.
Okay, so let me make sure I just got that right.
I'm not sure. The calls I know are out of state. Some of them have been, and there's a reverb. So, folks, if you're listening online on 1020KOAN.com's website, make sure you turn down your computer when you call in. Did you catch her question? Because we typically disconnect after the question's made.
Okay, well, I'll see if I got it right, and she can always drop me a line through my website if I did not quite get it quite right. It sounded like she said whenever she left the room that the bird started picking its feathers. Or I wasn't sure if she said screaming for attention.
That's what I heard too, the picking feathers.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of different reasons why birds will pick their own feathers, and if you that has FAQs about behavior problems, and I always recommend people go there because I have a great article there by a veterinarian about all the different medical reasons of veterinarian feathers, and that's really important for people to check out if they haven't already seen a veterinarian, because there's so many variables that could be important to get those checked out, and you want a veterinarian who's really good, has good experience with that particular problem. I often recommend people see if they can consult with Dr. Susan Clubb down in Florida on her website, susanclubb.com, with 2 B's. But first, make sure there's no medical issues. If you're pretty confident it is in response to, trying to get attention, then there's a few things you can do. One is obviously when the bird is picking is not when you go over and give it attention, because that will reinforce that behavior. But the moment it does something other than picking is a great time to go give it tons of attention, much more than it would get for feather picking. The other thing you can do is if you know there are times when you're going to be leaving and the bird is likely to respond with the feather picking behavior, before you leave, set the bird up with some fabulous enrichment. And actually, a former Alaskan, Chris Porter, has a great website, parrotenrichment.com, with lots of enrichment ideas that you can do at home on your own without having to spend a lot of money, and keep that bird highly enriched so that there's other activities for that bird to do. And so when it's time for you to leave the room, maybe the bird's engaged in something beneficial and healthy to do instead of feather picking.
Now, that makes sense. Before we get to Richard, who's the next caller, you mentioned Alaska and that connection, and I asked you in advance of the interview if there was a club or an association here in our state, and you mentioned the Alaska Bird Club, and you thought there might be one derivative or a sub club to that of with parroting. What do you know about Alaska and its parroting, I say parroting, but parrot associations, bird associations, and clubs? Is it fairly prominent in the state, or is it new and up and coming, or is it minimal?
Oh boy, you got me there. I'm not an expert on that for sure, but I do recall that in Anchorage, and because actually somebody who was a member of that club, who was also a really good dog trainer, attended a dog training seminar in which I was one of the guest speakers, and we talked extensively about trying to do something for the parrot owners up there, and specifically in Anchorage. So I know there's a community out there, and the woman I mentioned used to be in that area as well and actively involved, and so I know she put the word out to some of the Alaskans that I would be on the air tonight. So hopefully they're listening in.
I hope so, and I hope the Alaskans especially call you or at least reach out to you through Good Bird Inc., because I think that you're an invaluable resource for that. Our next caller, Richard, has been waiting patiently. Thank you. Welcome to the Tom Anderson Show, and what's your question or comment for Barbara?
Hey, Barbara. I got a question. I got a Goffin cockatoo that can get out of the cage no matter what lock on a cage, half, or anything else on a cage.
Okay, I think if I got it right, you said your Goffin's cockatoo can pick just about any lock on a cage.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, I got it.
I can put a bulldog clip on. I can put a ring on. I can put a pug clip on.
And he can still pick its way out. Now,
Yeah.
Richard, by the way, Richard, you're real hard. You're breaking up with some of the long-distance calls. Interestingly, aren't coming in clearly. A great question, Barbara, and that's a fun one for me, and I think the listeners who aren't parrot owners but just listening inquisitively to the interviewers, the questions. What is your thought on that? What would you do to stop the parrot from getting out of the cage so specifically, so tactfully? It's almost unnerving that it could do that.
Yeah, there are a lot of parrots that are able to do that, and cockatoos have a reputation for being well-versed at working on things like locks. And what some people do is they actually use the kind of padlocks that require a key. And I know it sounds a little inconvenient, but you can get small ones and just keep those keys nearby. And I know people that use that to lock the doors that hold the food bowls in, as well as the door to the open the cage to get the bird out. And another thing to do, we did talk about enrichment. There are some stainless steel enrichment toys that include things like nuts and bolts that are not toxic for your parrot. Some metals are toxic for parrots, but you get the stainless steel ones. They're a little more expensive, but they give your bird something, metal to play with that is not the lock. And with those two strategies, you'll probably be able to get around that problem. A lot of people have successfully done that.
Well, it's interesting that it's not just this fellow Richard that's experienced and suffered that, but there's more. So that must be a habitual or propensity that they have. So that's remarkable. I'm looking at your Facebook, Good Bird Inc., Barbara Heidenreich. Right on the very front, your latest photo posted was one of those large rodents. Yeah, so if someone wants to go to Facebook and look up I can't even pronounce it, and it's such a simple Good Bird Inc., you can see that photo, and you should like the page as well. There's a cute parrot right on the front of that. Okay, now we've talked a lot about parrots. What are some other animals that you own, and what are some other animals that you give advice and training on, or I guess some of your expertise in terms of how you raise them, how you purchase them, beyond parrots?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I also think there's a lot, personally, just in general, I think there's a lot of value about in sharing your home with an animal, whether it's a dog or a cat or a parrot, or also rabbits and guinea pigs and hamsters and rats. What else am I forgetting there? All those things, they also have value too. There's something about animals that it teaches us about nurturing, about compassion, about responsibility. And then I think if people focus on training with positive reinforcement, the other benefit is you get to have this incredible relationship with an animal. I always think about what if you were trying to get a wild squirrel to come take a peanut from your hand? That's kind of how I feel about some of these animals, even though we think of them as common pets, but I also treat them the same way, kind of like, can I get this little animal to want to hang out with me? And when we train with positive reinforcement, we can. And so I have a wonderful Holland lop-eared rabbit named Loretta, who is just amazingly well trained. She runs agility. She does little retrieves. She puts eggs in a basket.
Wow. So not only a comfort and is it a pet, but there's the training aspect, there's the connectivity with it. When we come back, Barbara, we'll wrap up with the last segment, a quick hour here, lots of good questions from callers. We'll talk a little bit more about this, and then also resources beyond you on how people can learn more about this as an owner, because I think responsible pet ownership is not only a part of this interview today, but a part of your passion and mine too, that people don't disrespect their animals and they take good care of them if they want to own them. So we have Richard, it may be the same Richard, I'm not sure, but he'll be on hold through the break, and we'll be right back. This is the Tom Anderson Show with Barbara Heidenreich.
Well, everybody's heard about the bird. Bird. The bird's a winner. Well, a bird is a winner.
Oh, Chris Combs, our producer's fine selection of music for the Barbara Heidenreich interview. Barbara is at the helm of Good Bird Inc., and she is an expert and a trainer and an advice giver and consultant regarding not just parrots, but the whole gamut of birds. We have a caller, but before we get to you, Richard in California, Barbara, what other birds, if someone said, hey, I've got a raven, ravens are big here in Alaska, or hey, a bald eagle flew into my window and I got to get it out, or hey, I have our state bird's the ptarmigan, and hey, Barbara, I like ptarmigan eggs scrambled. What do you recommend? How far does your advice giving go? Like with a bald eagle, might you say, hey, I don't deal with that, I don't deal with injuries, go to a veterinarian specializing in birds, or I don't know about scrambled egg, ptarmigan eggs, I'm not in culinary arts, I'm in training. What's the gamut upon which you consult?
Well, I will have to say, with any of those species that you mentioned, they're all native North American species. So technically, we're not allowed to keep them, and even parts of them without permission from the government. So what you really do with birds like that is you do have to see a licensed wildlife rehabilitator. And I know in Sitka, Alaska, you do have a raptor center there that obviously will take your bald eagles and anything that would happen to them. But if you did find an animal, I'm sure if you called your local veterinarian, they'd be able to point you in the right direction to where to take that animal to get it assistance right away. But those we can't keep in our home.
Yep, no, that's a good delineation, and some people may not even realize that. They should make sure they know the letter of the law for city, state, and federal regulations on animal ownership, including reptiles and big rats and little rats and all the different things. And that's good advice. I think that's very prudent before purchasing an animal, especially from a like a non-supplier or store owner, and maybe from a friend where you're unsure. We have Richard, who's been patiently holding from California on line one. Welcome to the show, Richard. And what's your question for Barbara? Well, we lost Richard. Oh. So we're back to you, Barbara. And another question I have is, do you deal with reptiles? You mentioned when you were a kid, the frog connection. Would you consult regarding snakes or regarding chameleons or any of the host of reptiles that I know some of my friends owned when they were children, and some still do as adults.
Well, funny you should ask that, because I was less than a month ago out at the London Zoo and was given the extreme honor of getting to see some of their reptile training. And there are some amazing things being done with reptiles these days. And the wonderful thing about animal training and the principles that we use is that they actually do apply to all species of animals, including humans. So it's all the same principles, and we just apply them based on what that, those specific needs of that animal. So like if we know a snake is not likely to respond to a food item because it's just eaten and it's not going to eat for another week or so, then we might use something like warmth or temperature as a way to reinforce behavior that we want them to do, say moving from one enclosure to another. So we just have to take into consideration the special needs of those specific animals. But definitely reptiles are absolutely being trained.
Now I have a question on Facebook, and the question is, parrots can be annoying, in my opinion. This is someone maybe a fan or not a fan, particularly if you're a senior citizen or an older couple. What is the tendency in the populace who purchase parrots the most? I think that's a good question. I think what they're getting at is that, is it a family bird? Is it good to have with a young child? To me, no, but you would know better. Is it better if you're single? And then I'm going to add to that question supplementally, what's the cost of a parrot? I have a hunch they're expensive. And then what's the upkeep cost?
Right. Well, to answer the first question, I will say that there does tend to be a type of a demographic going on there. We do tend to see people that are, maybe likely to have a parrot, maybe a family without children or their children have grown. They tend to be the more typical parrot owner, but that's not to say that there aren't families that are doing a great job with children and parrots and people who may be older than that with parrots as well. So, obviously it runs the whole spectrum, but we do see a tendency more towards the group of people that may not have children in the home at the moment. As far as costs go, certainly to buy a parrot, say, from a responsible breeder, you might be looking at $1,000 or more dollars, depending on what kind of parrot you're getting. Some species are not as expensive; they're more common. Certainly, birds like I mentioned before, like the budgergars and the cockatiels, are less expensive, and in my opinion, as enjoyable as the. So you're not having a loss by getting one of the small guys by any means at all. So, and as far as upkeep certainly food has a certain cost to it. Many people supplement their bird's diet with fresh fruits and vegetables and grains and things like that. But there is also what I think is probably a cost that people don't think about is the toys and enrichment, because that's a big part of keeping our birds comfortable and happy and engaged and doing things is to offer lots of enrichment. And I did mention that one site with some good do-it-yourself ideas, but if you're not a do-it-yourself kind of person, plan on spending a few dollars for some toys for your parrots, because they are supposed to destroy them. A lot of people think, oh, he ruined it, he destroyed it, but that's exactly what a parrot's supposed to do, because it's good for their beak. So plan on lots of destructible toys.
And another question came in. That's a good answer, and I think that's responsive to what they were looking at, kind of the range. And they certainly can go to your site, Good Bird Inc., and also to online Wikipedia, some of the maybe not even the encyclopedic sites as much as bird sites and parrot sites, and I'm sure there's a wealth of information. And before we conclude the interview, I want you to remind folks again of how they can contact you and get information. But that leads to another Facebook question, which is basically someone wrote, to me it seems there's a cruelty factor to keep a bird in a cage, and another person wrote, what happens if a parrot or one of these species related therewith escapes? Do they stick around the home, or are they bye-bye birdie gone? So how about the first one on the cruelty factor? Obviously you don't feel that way, but what would be a defense of that?
Well, I am one of those people that enjoys keeping my parrots flighted, so my birds actually have a pretty good setup. They certainly do have enclosures for when I'm not home and I'm not supervising them, but I also have an outdoor aviary where my birds get to go outside and fly, and then my house is equipped with a number of perches that they have been trained to go to so that they don't chew up the whole house. That is something that some people experience when their birds aren't trained. They chew wood, trim, and things like that. And so my birds, like today I had to do quite a bit of work around the house where I was moving around a bit. So one of my birds was out flying around the house, probably for 6 hours today. So they can experience a really good, free, life where they can move around a lot and get to experience a lot of enrichment and interact with you. It's really just about arranging your environment so that they can be successful and training them so that they do the things that you would like them to do so you're comfortable having them out.
Oh, that makes sense. Now, what about the escape question? I remember as a child in East Anchorage, a couple of times parrots were on the loose, and the TV news would report, if you live in East Anchorage, South Anchorage, wherever in Anchorage, look out for this parrot. They might show a picture, almost like a missing child, not to make light of that, and often they would be found. I distinctly remember twice, and the firemen, both times fire personnel from Anchorage Fire Department had to get them, and I was near one once, and there it was, and they got it and caged it. Do they stick around the home when they escape?
Well, actually, I have a whole DVD on that, believe it or not, called Get Your Bird Back, which I wish more people would get because they always contact me after the bird has flown away. And I'm like, oh, if you had this before, you'd have all the tools you need.
Wow.
But as somebody who's done free flight bird shows for years, absolutely, parrots are one of the easiest species to get back compared to some of the other things we fly in bird shows because parrots don't really like being out there by themselves. Even in the wild, they're usually with at least one other bird, if not a group of birds. So they're seeking humans. They're kind of like, where are you? I want to get to you. I'm not comfortable out here. So it is actually really, really likely that you will get your bird back if you are persistent and you don't give up and you keep looking for that bird and you follow a bunch of strategies we have in that DVD to help you get your bird back.
Well, that makes sense. It's nice to know that they stay close, but it's also sad, just as I'm sure many listeners are, or they wouldn't be tuning in unless they're just inquisitive. But to think of especially like a parrot, you love your birds so much, and for them to escape and be scared out there, it's good to know that there's self-help and ways to regulate and make sure that doesn't happen through your DVDs. Before we cruise off this interview, Barbara, I want to thank you, Barbara Heidenreich, Good Bird Inc., and you were so kind to call in, and I know it's later there in Texas. With our remaining seconds, why don't you give a plug one more time for information to contact you?
Yeah, my website is goodbirdinc.com, and if you're into rabbits, I also have one called bunnytraining.com, and you can get links to my Facebook, my YouTube, my blog, and also how to contact me from that goodbirdinc.com site.
Oh, perfect. Well, Barbara Heidenreich, I really appreciate your time and effort, and good for you to do this, such a good service. I'm proud of you for helping our nature's animals, and you're a good human for doing it. That's why I wanted you on the show. I hope to have you back. Next, we have Shannon Moore. She's on 6 to 9, and I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Thank God it's Friday. A few more hours, and we'll be on Friday and then a good weekend. So enjoy your evening. Drive safe. Stay tuned for Shannon Moore.